Good evening, everyone. It is evening here on the East Coast, and I'm welcoming astrologer Pam Younghans from the West Coast, because tonight we're going to talk about not only the new moon, but this eclipse, the South Node eclipse that we're also going to experience at the same time. So welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Elsie. Good to see you.
You too. So Pam, I had a couple people ask me this question, and it was exactly, is a South Node eclipse?
That's a great question. So in astrology, there are things called the North and the South Node, and they're just points in space. But eclipses occur when there's a new or a full moon within a certain number of degrees of that North or South Node. So every eclipse, whether it's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, is either a South Node eclipse or a North Node eclipse. So the North Node eclipse is pointing us towards the future. The North Node represents our highest evolutionary growth. The South Node represents what we're moving away from. So when we have a South Node eclipse, even though this is a new moon, which is, all about new beginnings, and it's the first new moon of 2019, so it has that extra emphasis. Even though we've got this underlying, this subtext that says, before you can go forward, you also have to release something. So I wrote in the journal this week, I think, about, move some energy, take some stuff to Goodwill. So I've done some of that. I know other people have too. It's representing the fact that we are leaving something behind so that we can move into a higher expression of ourselves, which is what then that North Node represents. Does that make some sense?
Yes, it does. Okay. And there's a reason that we wanted to talk about this tonight, because there's something very unique about this particular eclipse. Can you explain that a little bit further?
Yes. So this is it's got a serious note to it. First of all, it is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is kind of goal-oriented and, well, very goal-oriented and serious and responsible, so hopefully mature. But, so it's already got that energy around it. But if you've been into astrology at all, you've probably heard somebody talking about that January 2020 is when Pluto and Saturn, the two planets, align. So they're not quite there yet, but where this new moon is, which is when the sun and the moon align, it's at the midpoint between Saturn and Pluto. So it's got the energy of Saturn in it, and it's got the energy of Pluto in it, and I'll talk about what that might mean in just a minute. But it's kind of, in some ways, giving us hints as to what we might expect in January 2020 when this big alignment happens. So we really want to watch carefully right now exactly what's going on. So I looked at the news this morning. I generally try to stay away from the news broadcast too much, but I wanted to see what was going on that would relate to this. And certainly in the US, the government shut down, because Capricorn rules society and governments, and Saturn is limiting things, and Pluto is power struggles. So we've got that all manifesting in the US. Now, this is going to be strong again. A similar energy is going to be strong in April, May of this year. And then it's also going to be, of course, very strong next January. So we've got that in the US. I know France is having a lot of protests against government. Again, Capricorn representing government, Saturn representing authority, Pluto represent power, and whether power is abused or imbalanced, all of that kind of theme as well. And then what else did I see? Oh, and Brexit in the UK. There's still all of that tension, and the word stalemate keeps coming to mind. Certainly we've got that in the US. It seems like that's what's going on with Brexit. In France, I know these protests have been going on for a while. And I know I'm kind of focusing on the political side, and this is also personal for us, but we can use what's going on externally to say, how is that playing out in me? How am I holding on to old forms, Saturn, that really need to be transformed, Pluto? And what are the old patterns that need to be dislodged? So one thing about this being a South Node eclipse is that it is in Capricorn. And Capricorn has lots of great qualities, but since it's the South Node, we want to look at the qualities that it's asking us to move away from. So I've got a little list because we're moving away from South Node in Capricorn to North Node in Cancer. So Capricorn can be very controlling. Now remember, I'm only talking about the negative traits of Capricorn. Controlling, fearful. Cancer, trust. South Node in Capricorn can be unsympathetic. Cancer is all about empathy. It's really moving from a more restrictive place in us and place in the world and place in society and into more open-heartedness, which is actually why we're doing this webinar in a couple of weeks. It's actually why I've called this webinar Into the Heart, because Cancer is very heart-oriented, and it's very loving, compassionate, empathetic, sympathetic, nurturing, all of those qualities, and those are all heart qualities. So this is where we can kind of turn it around on ourselves, not just looking at what's going on politically, although we can certainly see a lot of representations going on there. But how do those qualities fit into us, and how can we move beyond some of the places where we might be rigid and where we might be judgmental and all of that? So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that's really a wonderful analysis of what we're looking at. And of course, you know, the solar eclipse is a lot of emotion, and yet you have Capricorn, which is practical reality, as you just explained. So it's really like this tug of war with Pluto and Saturn in there. We really do have to let go of the old in order to step into the new. So I'd also like to offer this little easy exercise that everybody can do. And we're just going to do great big giant figure eights. We're going to start above our head and say, I bring in the new, turn it around, push out the old. Over the chest, I bring in the new, push out the old. On the solar plexus, I bring in the new, push out the old. Now we're just going to scoop behind us and throw all that energy up and over us. And then one more time, I bring in the new. Turn your palms, push out the old. Over the chest, I bring in the new, push out the old. Solar plexus, I bring in the new, push out the old. Now we're going to scoop all that energy behind us right to our shoulders and push our energy all the way out and feel that expansion. Really open up our energy. As you mentioned, Pam, that in order to accomplish moving through this, we really need to move our energy. So that's a really easy exercise, and you're literally saying outside. I want you to hear your own voice out loud saying, I bring in the new, push out the old.
Perfect. That's great. And I love that at the end, you know, your arms are extended and you're open. Your heart is really open.
Yes.
So it really confirms that side of it as well. So perfect.
So how does today's solar eclipse relate now to the lunar eclipse in 2 weeks?
They're both part of the same lunar cycle. So of course, in a usual month, we have a new moon and then we have a full moon. And the new moon is always the start of a process, and the full moon is meant to be a culmination or a climax or sometimes a crisis. So new moons and full moons, when they become solar eclipses and lunar eclipses, it's kind of like a mega it's an even bigger energy. So we really want to watch developments now with this solar eclipse and to see what comes to fruition with the lunar eclipse. It's in the 20th or 21st, depending on where you live in the world.
Yeah.
And eclipses also, because they only come every 6 months, they really are indicators of what we'll all be working with for the next 6 months too. So it also has that bigger indicator of, watching what's going on now and saying, how do I work with this energy? Because we will be working with it for quite a while.
Well, not only that, Pam, but this combination at the very beginning of 2019, everything that you're talking about is actually manifesting in the United States, as you pointed out. And then more importantly is, how do we take that internally and relate to what's going on with us inside, outside, and how we can make those changes.
Yeah, exactly. And I know it's hard we tend to look outside of us and say, oh, well, they're rigid or they're judgmental. But in saying that, I'm being rigid and judgmental.
Yes.
So it really requires us to look at that. And, one thing that occurred to me today is that it's really about working with our shadow,
Okay.
And I don't know if you know who Matt Kahn is. Are you familiar with his work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So I've been listening today, just serendipitously. He has one of his YouTubes is called Respecting the Shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And I really highly recommend it. It's a little complicated for me to explain right now, but it's a whole new way of working with the shadow by respecting it, because it acts out because it feels disrespected. So it's actually a really powerful thing to watch right now as well.
Okay, and I'll find Matt's video on that and include it in the replay. He's also a spiritual teacher that we have, and we're really being called, from what you're saying, to have compassion for ourselves and those around us. And the Dalai Lama's famous line is, if you want to be happy, practice compassion, and if you want to live a healthy, happy life, again, he says, practice compassion. So that's a little bit of what you're saying too, versus judgment.
Perfect. Yes, thank you for that quote. That's perfect. It's great. The other thing I did want to mention today too, as I was looking at the news, again, that South Node in Capricorn, this is very masculine type energy. North Node in Cancer is very feminine energy. And so as we look at the fact that we're now in a phase of moving from Capricorn manifestations to Cancer manifestations, we're really about empowering the feminine. And that's what was in the news today as well. I don't know, did you hear about the women in India?
No, I did not watch the news today.
So women in India came together holding hands. They created a line that was 385 miles long to protest that they were not allowed into the temple. And I wasn't clear whether it was when they were menstruating or after they had come to childbearing age. But anyway, to break down that barrier, that Capricorn restriction through the feminine, all of these women, and it's just so powerful. So that came to mind as well today as a manifestation of the more hopeful side. It's still that conflict, it's still probably a little bit of a lot of a stalemate, but it just seemed like a very hopeful and confirming report to read about.
Yes, especially the women in India, I think of them as, they had to really come together and be motivated to form that kind of a chain. That's an extraordinarily powerful vision, not only for their country, but the world, for women in general.
Oh, it's marvelous. Yeah, there is one photo, like I said, I got on NPR, and there's one photo, and you know, they wear these lovely saris that have these beautiful colors. And this line of women with all of these colors is just, it really touches my heart in a profound way. So.
Well, perhaps it's a sign to come of, as you said, the divine feminine and helping to heal the world. We really need healing. And even the Dalai Lama said a long time ago that the women will heal the world. So we really need that to happen soon.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just want you to tell us a little bit about the webinar. We have a webinar coming up Thursday, January the 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And Pam is going to take us month by month for the next 6 months and tell us what to expect in the sun, moon, and stars. You'll have special calendars that you can print out and reflect with every day and each month. So Pam, I know you've named this phase 1 into the heart, as you said earlier.
Right. Because, you know, the very things that I've been talking about, how this eclipse today triggers this Saturn-Pluto energy, and really this takes us throughout 2019 and into a big part of 2020, when we not only have Saturn and Pluto aligned, but then Jupiter aligns with Pluto. So we're really looking at a 2-year process that pretty much culminates or finds new energy at the very end of 2020. So it's so linked together. I couldn't divide it out and say, oh, this part is about this 6 months is about this, and this 6 months is about this. I'm going to call them different names. But this first one is the first 6 months. It really, into the heart, it really is about acknowledging the direction we're meant to be going. And this is going to be very strong, especially in April, May. This energy is going to be very strong, the Pluto-Saturn South Node. So I'm going to talk a lot about that. We'll go through overview of those 2 years and then focus on the 6 months. And then, of course, the looking through the calendars week by week. We'll talk about the eclipses. There's the one today, the one on the 21st. I'll review those. We'll talk about the equinox and the solstice in June, and we'll talk about a couple of, can't remember whether they're new moons or full moons, but a couple of those are pretty interesting as well. So you don't have to know astrology to partake. I do my best to explain things as we go. So yeah, I hope that it's both instructive and supportive and gives people something to kind of put their brains around as we go forward into these first 6 months of the year.
Great, Pam. And you do a wonderful job of explaining things, you know, just how they might affect us as you did tonight, you know, physically or emotionally, spiritually, or even politically. So that will be January the 15th, an hour and a half. The link is up there so that you can register and join us. It's recorded for replay. You can have the replay for the whole 6 months. And also, you might want to sign up for a special individual reading with Pam to help you move through these next 6 months. And all that information will be part of the webinar as well.
Thank you, Elsie.
You're welcome. So Pam, this has been exciting to talk about, and it sounds like this year and next year are really going to be pivotal years for us here in the U.S. and of course across the world, with things that we've just seen, as you explained, and India, and also the other strife that's going on throughout Europe. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. And I want to thank Shelley and Sherry, Rebecca, Denise, all the people that are on. And we're going to get this replay right up very, very soon to you and to all of those that have already signed up. So Pam, thank you so much. And we will see you January 15th.
Great. Thank you so much, Elsie.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody.